coloniality, right? That's a school of thought in Latin American philosophy. It's very important to know where it's born. So for starters, we say that La Española Island, which was the first settlement of Spaniards when they came to America, we say that it's a laboratory of coloniality. So it was when the first settlement of coloniality started in America. So the invention, what we call the invention of America, started there. And La Española Island, which was actually known as Haiti at the beginning, of Haiti, is shared by the Dominican Republic and Haiti in the actuality, in currently, right? So it's very important to start there. So my position on the issues of colonialism and race and class are very connected to my origins. Why? Because my country it's 90% Black. The people there are 90% Black, even though we don't acknowledge that, because there are politics that are white. Even though the people in the country are Black, most of them, the politics are white and white supremacist. And that's very important to know. So to start, when we start talking about decolonization or decoloniality, it's important to know there's a difference between colonialism and coloniality. So when we talk about colonialism, we mean the historical moment of colonization that we say started in the case of the Americas in 1492, when the Spaniards and all the colonizers came to the American, in that time it was not known as America, it was known as Abya, following the name the Kuna indigenous people gave to the continent. So at that moment, following the thought of Aníbal Cano, capitalism was made global. So before that, capitalism was only a thing that happened on Europe, right? Or that side of the world, because it was not spread to this side. But the moment that we had the colonial trade and the sclavization of indigenous people and Black people in the Americas, that was the moment when capitalism started here and hence was made global. In words of Enrique Dusso, an Argentine scholar, it's an inseparable triad of colonialism, capitalism, and modernity. So in the decolonial school of thought, the coloniality is the dark side of modernity. So we wouldn't have advancement, or that's how we call it, right? Or civilization without modernity. And that modernity came through enslavement of Black people, indigenous people, extractivism, and all of that. And of course, with colonialism came Eurocentrism, which is the Europe as center of knowledge and power, and of course, the economic center of the world. So coloniality refers to the logics behind colonialism and the effects of it. So we mean the effects of capitalism, modernity, and of course, globalization, and it's still ongoing. So colonialism is a moment, right? It can be happening right now, but it's a historical moment. It's something that happened or it's happening, while coloniality is something that is there. It's a thought. It's a thought process. It's logics. How people, their laws, how people act, their behavior in their relationship with colonialism. So we also refer as coloniality. To the relationships, the hierarchy that were established after or during that colonial time period. So when we talk about decolonization, there are two aspects to take into account: the geopolitical aspect or the epistemic aspect. When we talk about geopolitics, we mean the actual liberation of a country from the dominance of another. Like, let's say, the independence of Dominican Republic, right, from the Spaniards, even though it's not like acknowledged as an independence, but it happened because Dominicans believe they're Spaniards in a way. So that's that geopolitical aspect or sense of the colonization. But there's also an epistemic aspect. When we mean decolonization, we also can mean the fact that we can acknowledge other forms of thoughts and knowledge from indigenous or Black peoples. So usually that with coloniality comes what we call, and that we're going to talk about that in a little, we call the coloniality of knowledge, which is that after colonialism, there was this process in which everything was rationalized, everything was categorized in between savage and smart or important or valid, and that is part of the colonization process. So in order to decolonize, we also have to get rid of that. So Fanon, which is an important figure in the colonial school, he was a Black man, and he was a psychiatrist, and he was from Martinique, a Caribbean island. He went to France to study, and there he became very familiarized with racial struggles, right? There was an important moment in the Black liberation movement, let's say, way back or way before the Black liberation movement in the United States, in which Black people went to France to study, and then they also, this is actually happening. And then in the case of Fanon, he went to the war in Algeria. And then he started to think about decolonization. So for him, it was a violent process. We usually have these conversations in regards Fanon's thought about decolonization because, well, he was in a war. So you might think, well, he probably was talking about the fact that a war, right, of the colonization as a war. But there's also the possibility that, well, since colonization was a violent process, in order to get rid of all its remnants, we have to, of course, fight back, and it's a violent process. There's also what we call the politics of desenganche, which literally means unhooking, as opposed to deconstruction. So it's like your mind, it comes, the body and the mind, both of them need to get rid of all these Eurocentrist process of thoughts. And Mrs. which was from, I think it was Martinique as well, and he went to France, the same thing as Fanon, but he didn't go to war. So it implied an intellectual cimarronaje. The cimarrones were basically Black people that fought against Europeans during the colonial times, and they fought for their own liberation. They were rebels, to put it in that way. So because of them, we have people that are descendants of Black people in the Americas, because of them, we're still alive, basically. So he thinks that it implies not only a physical fight, but also an intellectual fight against the remnants of colonialism. So it's very, I recommend reading both of them, Fanon and MSSR. Fanon was a psychiatrist, so he has an interesting view on decolonization because he made studies on the pattern of thought of Black people who were colonized. And he said also, this Black man thinks like a white man, and this is because yada, 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 yada. So he made, he has two important books. One is the word, I don't remember the name in English, I'm sorry. It's Los Condenados de la Tierra. And the other one's like Black Faces, White Minds. I think that's the name. Something like that, I'm sorry. So the books are, you can look for his name, and the books are very interesting. And Fanon is very complicated to read nowadays because he has some misogynistic point of views, but you have to, yes, it's very sad. So you have to read him like, okay, so you have to question every word he says. You have to pay attention because it's very easy to, okay, so it sounds reasonable, a lot of the things he says, but also it's very questionable, other things, so that you have to pay attention to that. So then we come in, when we talk about coloniality, we have to talk about two sides of the colonization process, which is modernity and coloniality. Well, it was actually a concept coined by the colonial scholar Aníbal, he was Peruvian, I think, Aníbal Quijano, and was later developed by other decolonial thinkers. It actually infers that coloniality and modernity are two sides of the same coin. Or as Quijano said before, coloniality is the dark side of modernity. It helps understand the epistemic aspects that come with Eurocentrism. I mean, it's not only the physical fact of enslavement or the shame that people have, but also their thought process and how our countries and our nations today are based on that foundation. So it raises questions about the role of globalization on that universalization of capitalism as sistema mundo. So Quijano and other decolonial scholars thought about modernity and coloniality as a world system. So it's a pattern that not only governs Latin America and America, but the whole world, right? So it's not only bound to in a specific geopolitical area. The moment that capitalism went global, it affected every areas of the world. So every relationship that we have is based on that. So, and also it's very interesting when Aníbal Quijano, he started to talk about coloniality. He was based on Black Marxists, basically, every thought of it. He just named their thoughts, but it's the same thought process. So the thought is that when the Spaniards first came to the Americas, they set a caste system, which is a racial system, right? And that was connected to class. So he said, so the indigenous and Black people were the slaves. They were not even human. So they were the ones supposed to do the work, or the hard work. It was not actually work, just, slavery. And then he implied that from that caste system, that racial system of categorization, there were the class system in the Americas was created somehow. So then he started with the concept of coloniality of power. It's a world pattern of power in which European colonialism shapes social orders and forms of knowledge based on the idea of race. It identifies racial, political, and social hierarchies, order imposed by European colonialism in Latin America that prescribed value to certain peoples or societies while disenfranchising others. And Quijano argues that the colonial structure of power resulted in a caste system, as I said before, in which people were differentiated through invented phenotypical traits. So it's important to know, as Ochi Curiel, the colonial scholar as well, she said that race is a fiction. So it's not something factual, right? It's not something scientific. It's not something that can be proven. It's something that was invented. So even though we have different color of skin, we have different faces or stuff, there's not actual scientific base to tell that there are these number of races, right? It's something social, it's invented. And it was invented during the colonization process. There was not actual, at least in the Americas, it was not an actual division of race before they came, right? People saw themselves and it was normal. Like there was no a word for Negro or for white. That difference came when they took the African people from their houses, put them in a ship, and then transferred them to the Americas. And also that happened to indigenous people as well. So it's important to know, according to Quijano, there wouldn't be capitalism in America if it wasn't because of race. Then we have coloniality of knowledge, which is basically the same thing applied to thoughts. So rationality is thought as a colonial imposition that serves capitalism. So let's say science or Western science, right? Because there was science before Europeans came to the Americas. It was not following the scientific method, but it was science in a sense, because there were thought processes. There was philosophy, there was literature, there was education. It was a world, right? But all of that was invalidated when Europeans came. So said, oh, so you have to be Christian, you have to be this, you have to dress this way. What you do is savage, is inferior. You have to follow our beliefs. And so science and Christianism are actually seen as two sides of the same coin as well. So while it's very scientific, some of them followed very scientific values, others followed very Christian values, as a form of colonization. And at that time, 16th century, when all of this was happening, you had the women were being born, African slaves were being traded to the Americas. Europe was getting richer and richer, and you say like, oh, at that moment was the illustration, right? People were supposed to be smarter and seeing the world in a different way, but actually it was darker ages for most of the people. And of course, knowledge was seen as a tool for power, because whoever had that knowledge that was seen as valid had more power in their hands. So let's say at that time, not everybody could read the Bible, right? Or not everybody could have access to that education, because you had to go to a university, for example, or go to a school. And there were no schools in Latin America or America at that time. There were no universities. Actually, the first university came later, and not in people of color. I mean, Black and Indigenous people were not allowed to go. Only the sons. Pay attention that it's only the sons of the colonizers, not even the daughters, right? So the results of that are what we call epistemicide, which is the killing of the original thoughts of the original people that lived in America. Then we have coloniality of being, which raises the question, what is humanity? Who is human? And why enslaved people were enslaved? So at that time, white equals human. So anything that is not white is not human. That's the logic that justified that slavery of Blacks and Indigenous people. So that's basically it. So if you are the same as, let's say, as the donkey, right? So you don't have that rights. I deserve as a person. So you just work for me. You're the same as a thing. You're the same as a table. You don't have rights. Do you give rights to a table? That's a question you don't, right? So those people were seen like a table. They were a commodity. They were a thing, something you buy. And that same thing happened to their land. So the difference between the thought that was before colonizers came, that there was a connection between that person, their community, and their land. So the land, the territory, was part of their relationship, of their personal and social relationships. It was not seen as a commodity, as an item. It was part of their processes. But when capitalism came, everything was seen as a commodity. Everything was given a price, even people. So it's very different, right? Then we have the coloniality of nature, which is a concept that is being developed today. It's not like as old as the other ones, but it's basically that nature is inland are seen as commercial items. We have ecocide, we have extractivism, which is basically the extraction of natural resources from indigenous land or whatever land that is start with indigenous land. Of course, it keeps going. We have Asia that is falling victim of that. We have other Latin American countries. What is happening to Venezuela? They like want to extract petroleum, or any other country from Latin America. We have right. So we have, for example, we have the United States that has a very, very famous extractivist model. So most of the economy of the world right now is based on that. So basically, when you extract those natural resources, you're destroying the land, you're destroying nature, and there are people and other living beings that are there. So you destroying habitats, and of course, you're killing thousands of species, of different species. So it's very important to know that, because when indigenous people before, and still it's like that, if you talk to some indigenous from any part of the world, not only Latin America, you can go to Africa and talk to an indigenous person, you can go to Australia, you can go to Canada, right, to United States. And Native American people and indigenous people all over the world share the same thought that, well, land is part of our social structure. For indigenous people, and even some of the African societies, we talk to the land. Land has feeling, land has a name. The river sings. It's seen as an emotional thing. It doesn't have a price. It's seen as it has the same rights of a person. So that's why you see indigenous leaders that fight against ecocide, like Berta Cáceres, who was killed a few years ago, and still is not, we don't have justice for her, fighting for territory, fighting for land. And because for those people, land is not a commodity, it's part of the structure. So after that, there comes Maria Lugones, which was an Argentine scholar, a feminist scholar specifically, and she raised the question, so, well, you talk about the race was important in the composition on capitalism in Latin America, but what about gender, right? So you only talk about race, but what about gender? She said, oh, actually, gender has an important place, an important role in the creation of capitalism here. And she created a concept that was the coloniality of gender. It was that a different system that was the modern colonial modern system of gender, as opposed to the universal patriarchy. So following Maria Lugones' thought, she created or coined that term decolonial feminism, which was a different branch of feminism, or different feminism. And she expressed critiques not only to the current decolonial thought of that time, but also to the current feminism. So it branches from materialistic feminism, which is French feminism of that time. If you know Monique Wittig, for example, and also from Black feminism and feminism of color, which were all in the United States. So Maria Lugones, even though she's from Argentina, she went to the US, she studied in the US, so she's an immigrant as well. So she inserted critiques to heterosexuality, I'm sorry, as there's a concept by lesbian or materialistic feminism that is called compulsory heterosexuality. So she inserted part of that thought to the decolonial feminist thought, of course. And so she argued that a part of the creation or the invention of the Americas was that Black and indigenous men and women were not deemed as human. They were not men and women, so they didn't partake of gender. Gender was something that was considered only for humans, and who was human were the white people. So that those hierarchies were actually only from the people who were on the top. So that the other hierarchy was also you're gendered, means you're human, but the other people were only seen as commodities, as animals. So they were only female and male, right? So there was, following that thought of uh, um, Lugones thought that there was no actual division of that sexual work between Black and Indigenous people because they were all doing the same work. Of course, the women were giving birth to more slave people, but other than that, most of them were doing the same work. So you had Black men working inside the house and white women working in the fields or sugar canes or doing that hard work, right? Well, so that delicacy that, oh, so women are so uh, so so weird and wow, and so like fairy-like beings was not something that was considered for those women. So she says that gender in the case of the Americas was a colonial concept, was a colonial construct. And you say, oh, that's only Black people, yes. But then Ochikuriel, she started, oh, maybe Lugones is crazy what she's talking about, but she, right? Like you have to show evidence that that is something that actually happened. But then she started to research on that, start research on that. And she found out that just so you know, you know, Curiel is an anthropologist. So of course she needs to find evidence on stuff. So she found out something very interesting. So I don't remember the year, but it was in the 16th century, in the very, very beginning, I think 1502 or something like that. So there was a set of laws called Leyes de Burgos, the Burgos laws. They were basically, it's very funny. They were basically a set of behavioral etiquette for indigenous people at the time. So they said, oh, so this is a woman, literally, that's what they say. This is a woman and this is a man. So a woman needs to do this. She needs to dress like this. She needs to work in this. She needs to talk like this. This is the education that a woman needs. And this is a man. A man needs to do this, yada, yada, yada. And they both need to get married and have children. So that was only created for indigenous people, right? Because of course, white people already knew that. So you might think, like, maybe that's not gender, but what is gender, right? It's the social construct based on the sexual hierarchies and the differences, whatever. So that was how she's following Cruel thought that's one of the first evidences she found that gender was actually something that was inserted by colonizers in the Americas. So maybe we had other hierarchies before, or maybe we had something similar to gender, right? Like there were differences between men and women, but how do we actually know that? If the categories we have to define men and women are actually white categories or colonial categories, right? When we think about a woman, we don't actually think about an indigenous woman, we think about a white woman. You Google woman and you will see a white woman. So that's that Eurocentric thought of what a woman is. So the whiter the woman is, or the whiter the female is, she's closest to being a woman. So that's when she started to question, not only Lugones, but other decolonial feminists, like Yudelkis Espinosa and Oshi Curiel as well. They started to question also what is a mestizaje or what is mulataje, right? So in other words, mestizaje is proximity to whiteness, while mulataje is proximity to blackness. But mestizo people are still the sons and daughters of those indigenous people. So even though they were closer to being human, they were still not deemed as human, right? They're still part of that racialization process. So Lugones explained that gender, more than the division of men and women, was actually that in that colonial system was actually the division of human and not human. So as long as you're gender, as long as you're a woman or man, you are a human being. And of course, that critique Lugones made to the thought of Quijano was like, oh, so you're talking about race, but who actually had the power were the white, cis heterosexual males, right? So there was that's the figure of the patriarch. And some uh, of the critics Lugones, Curiel in this case, has that there's a difference between being, let's say, a macho, right? That's the sexist man, and being a patriarch. The patriarch is a figure of power. So who gets to be that figure of power? You might be very sexist and very misogynistic, but do you have actual power in the system? That's the question she raises. So we usually say, oh, the patriarchy are all the men. When you say that, you're saying that all the men have equal power in the system, and that is not the case. We acknowledge that there is a system that gives certain amount of power to men, right? Of course, it's not the same thing being a man than being a woman. It's not the same thing being a black man than being a black woman, or indigenous man than being a white woman. And something that we're going to say is that actually, yes, you cannot deny that during that colonial process, indigenous men, they were very misogynistic as well. They were allies of the white people, and they were not, even though there was not their culture, to put it in that way, it was not the original thought process of indigenous people. In order to survive, they had to do that. So yes, we cannot deny that there is patriarchal thoughts or gendered thoughts or sexist or misogynistic culture between indigenous people. That is something that in Black people as well, that is something that happens, and we cannot deny that. Because when we talk about colonialism, we're not only talking about, as we said, colonialism, that moment of colonization, but also the remnants of all those processes, those hierarchies. So I forgot to put the image here, I'm sorry, but following the thought of Lugones and Quijanos and all those decolonial thoughts, that system is not thought about as something as separate oppressions or systems or hierarchies. It's all the same. So Lugones thought it was a braid. So compared to Kimberly Crenshaw thought that it was actually an intersection, the intersectionality theory. Lugones thought it was a braid and that everything was connected. So everything was actually the same compound. And I don't know if you know about her, but there's this activism, indigenous activism. Her name is Yasnaya Aguilar. And she came to the thought it was actually a mass, right? So it's like you have, you're making tortillas and you have this compound, where she thought about it like that. The system is that you have all the ingredients, but it's actually that these all systems work at the same time. They are not separated. It's impossible to separate it. So when we talk about a Black woman or Black lesbian woman, for example, you have all these systems. You have heterosexuality, you have gender, and you have whiteness working against her. It's not like one thing at the same time. So when we say that, all these systems, also when we say that all the systems work at the same time, for example, and it's a question that is currently ongoing, who is privileged and who is not? So the question is, or we might say that privilege is a class thing, right? Or a racial thing, or a gender thing. But there are people, for example, when we say that you're privileged following gender standards, you're a Black male, for example. But if we say the system is all working at the same time, and you're Black, poor man, right? So how are you actually privileged following the system? Because you're privileged in one of the aspects of the system doesn't mean you're actually privileged in the system. So it was something Yudaki said recently that so following that train of thought, Black men don't have actually gender privilege. So she believes that actually white women in that sense have more privilege than Black men in that sense. So it's very interesting. That's something that's still in process. So decolonial thought, it's not something that it's already done. So something that's still ongoing. It's that I wrote an article about that, following an article that Yudakis also wrote about that, but hers is a little different. She talks about education and how we are working towards a future without actually looking at the past. We should look at the past because we are living the future of a past that isn't ours. That's following a manifesto that written by indigenous people. So Yudakis believes that decolonial thought is not done. We're still working on it because there are a lot of things we don't know, right? We cannot just um, take it for granted, like what we already know, because maybe we're not right. Maybe we're just lying to ourselves. We have to keep researching. We have to keep looking for the knowledge of indigenous people. The thing is that most of the knowledge that they had is right now passed early because what they had written was destroyed, right? And there are still little things. So we have to be very critics, very have to develop what Ochikuri likes to say. We have to be very critical of what we know. We have to raise the questions. And also, it's very interesting that Gorsfoge, one of the current decolonial scholars that work with Keanu, but still alive, he said that, okay, so if you're from the left, you're anti-capitalist, right? But you have this Western thought, you are racist, and you don't consider patriarchy or gender as an actual structure of power and its effect on capitalism, then you're just what he calls the white left. And if you are a feminist, but you don't consider capitalist or you don't consider race, then you're just a white feminist. But if you're anti-racist and you don't talk about capitalism and you don't say a word about gender and all the structures, then you're just a liberal anti-racist activist. You are not actual anti-racist because and this is very interesting because it's something Angela Davis said. If you want to abolish, all the systems of oppression, we have to work on them at the same time. So we usually think as feminism as the work of women, the fight of women, the issues of women. But if you wanna work for all women, you have to work for working women, for poor women, right? You have to work for women of color, for example. And in order for you to work for working class women, you have to work for working class men as well. And in order for you to liberate Black women or indigenous women, for example, you have to work as well for Black and indigenous men. So it's a race question. For who is feminism or the left or anti-racism fighting, right? So if the systems are only one system, we have to fight against all of them. So I think that's it. I think someone wants to say something.
Thank you. Yeah, I think now we can move into the Q&A section. So
Okay.
if anyone on Zoom wants to start, or perhaps we also here might have. You wanna go first?
Um,
Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Natalia. I am from Colombia, and
Ooh.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing like your knowledge and your thoughts and like kind of your perspective of all these topics in the context of Latin America. I feel like it's super exciting. I have a lot of questions, but I'm gonna touch upon the last topic that you just mentioned because it's quite interesting. Yeah, like considering all the areas that we have to do work and like we have to really just get better and like really work for like social justice and stuff. Um, but at the same time, I know like it can be very overwhelming to like
Oh yeah.
tackle this one issue that obviously is connected to so many other issues. So I was wondering like how do you feel about the responsibility of yeah like what is feminism and for whom is it too, but also like I don't know, how does it intersect with climate justice, for example, or like yeah like racial justice, and where do you draw the limits of fine, I know I have to work for all, but at the same time
Yeah.
I also know I have my own limitations.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I actually consider myself a feminist, but I also know that it has its own limitations. So I only, for example, use the tag because it serves some political things, right? So if I go to some space and say, "Oh, I'm a feminist," so people, "Oh, so she thinks like this," so it's easier to understand what's my train of process, my train of thought is. But at the same time, I think that, as I said, it has its own limitations because you usually think, oh, so you're only a feminist, you only think about the issues of women, right? But so if you want to liberate those women, or if I want to think about myself, right? I am a Black woman from Dominican Republic. When you read a feminist book, let's say you read, I don't know, famous Betty Friedan, Betty Friedan, for example, she didn't write about Black women. They actually divided themselves from Black women. And when Black women asked them for help, they didn't, oh, so you actually would do want to work with you, right? So I think about that. And of course, when I call myself an anti-racist as well, I know well, I need to call myself that because other feminists are not doing it, right? So I have to do that part. And there are people who are gonna believe, who are gonna think the way I do. That's why the tags are helpful. And also because there are issues that are not spoken about as often as others. So we're gonna talk about race, um, and you go to, let's say, as happened to me, I had this comment, it wasn't, I'm gonna, quote unquote, because it's fake, it's supposed to just a fascist, but he was communist and he was very racist. Like I never received, like I have years without receiving such racist comments. And you go to those kind of spaces, which are usually white, at least here in the United States, and you raise the question about race, and they will tell you, no, but class is more important, right? So I think that right now, the space that works for me is the feminist space. But at the same time, I raise the question about, is it climate justice, right? You cannot have racial justice if you don't have climate justice, and you can have gender justice if you don't have racial justice. So that's, of course, you have to put yourself in the space that accepts you better, that goes better with the tag you choose for yourself, but you have to raise the questions like, so who are we working for? It can be overwhelming, of course, but you choose one thing. I think we can do that. Like, of course, there are people that specify, also, I work for this, but also you have this knowledge that backs you up. Like you have this, also, I'm anti-capitalist, I am anti-racist, I am for climate justice, I am for food justice, for example, and all of that. You can work all of that and still be a feminist, right? So I think that's, you have something to, I think that's how I think about it. I have something to back me on that, right? Even though I'm a feminist, I think like this because of this and this and this. And when I'm gonna talk about women issues, I'm gonna bring this up as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I can ask the next question. Hi, I mean, you know me, Max. Everyone knows me. No, everyone here knows me, rather. Yeah, I think I want to ask something related to the coloniality of knowledge and academia contemporarily. So I'm just wondering, in the sense that if coloniality of knowledge seems to, in a way, monopolize knowledge to use it as a power, um, I wonder whether any decolonial activity can happen in or through academia, or is anything done in academia inherently colonial?
So that's a good question, actually, and that's a question that is very important. So I was actually watching a video from Oshi Curiel yesterday. As I said, she's Dominican, she's a decolonial scholar as well. And she works in academia, she's a professor. She has a PhD and everything, right? And she says, so someone asked her the same question. So can we decolonize through academia or can we decolonize academia? And she says, oh, so actually, in order to decolonize academia, we have to destroy it. And I was like, wow, that's very radical, right? So she said, well, you can actually work in academia and, raise critical questions about academia. That's fine. And also you have to understand who is actually part of academia, right? So we call academia the ivory tower here. I don't know if you're aware of that, but here in the US, it's a common nickname for academia, the ivory tower. Why? Because it's mostly white. So when you have Black people in academia, they're not. I mean, even in African, for example, African American studies or ethnic studies, you mostly see white people. It's ironic, but it's something that happens. So, even if you're Black and you're working on academia, it doesn't mean you're part of it, right? So I think it's very important. We have to leave. So if you have a PhD and you're studying in academia or you're working in academia, like you're not a traitor to the decolonial thought. First of all, most of these scholars were part of the academia, right? They were working on it. But it doesn't mean that they were the academia. They were not like the creators of it. They didn't have any benefits from it. It was only a job. You have to, I mean, you're a man of color, for example, you know that you were not born rich. You don't have a ranch with a lot of animals, and you don't have like your dad is not, when he dies, he's not gonna give you like tons of money. That's probably not something that's gonna happen. So you have to work for yourself and your family. That's the difference, right? So I think that decoloniality might not actually happen, like decolonization might not happen through academia because academia has the monopoly of thought. It's university, right? As opposed to what Quijano implied that we have to have a pluriversity, diverse, like that this diversity of thoughts, and they're all valid, right? But so you can be still in academia, raise critical questions about it, and be a decolonial thinker. But I think decolonization happens outside of it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello, I'm back. So let me look for it. Yeah, I don't remember if it was Fanon or like another Black writer that said that like Black people in Latin America and the United States and Europe and Africa did not face like the same issues because their contexts differed, and therefore kind of like their point, like the opportunity to come together and like raise our voices as one also kind of seem a bit like quote unquote impossible because we were just dealing with different contexts, right? So this makes me think a bit of like just Latin America specifically, and how for example, you have in Argentina just like zero notion of white like black people, to like
Yeah.
places like Colombia where black people, like, they're there, and like obviously we exist, but people don't recognize themselves as black, or is like being black also equates to being poor or like living in violent environments, right? So I'm wondering if you, like, what is your thought on this idea? Do you feel like in Latin America, Black people do share a common ground to kind of raise their voices together against these oppressions that we have, or is it really we have different contexts that we have to face apart, and only then we can like come together or something like that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So yeah, I believe that there's this difference of context, but also that we have the same issues, right? It's basically the same. They come from the same place. But of course, I cannot say that Dominican Republic has the same issues as, let's say, Argentina. Of course not. Or Brazil has the same issues as, let's say, I don't know, Chile, right? But there's something very interesting that, as opposed to, let's say, Black thought, to decolonial thought, is that we also think as indigenous people, like we think of the issues of Black indigenous people as the same. Of course, they have their difference, but the colonizing comes with retaking the land, with but that's literally what it means. Decolonization is just taking the land back. There's even a movement here in United States called Land Back, which is Native American people fighting to get their spaces. So when you think about that, we have actually a common ground. And it's very, when the George Floyd thing happened and there were a lot of protests, you actually saw a lot of Latin American people, Black, what we say, like Black Latin American people, the Afro Latinos. And you see indigenous people on the streets as well. And they were all non-white people. Of course, they were white people, but they were not the ones, that I'm talking about. And they had a common ground there. And it's when we fight, that racial oppression and all of that. And of course, it didn't, for example, in the United States and the rest of Latin America, it didn't happen in the same way. It didn't come from the same people, but it's something that I shared with a friend. She's actually going through academia right now, and she is working on colonialism. And it's actually a thought we shared. Latin America has been Black for longer than the United States. You have to understand that. So even the Black liberation movement and the abolitionist movement in the United States was inspired by Latin America. We have Haiti, even though politically speaking, they don't consider Haiti as part of Latin America because it's Black. It's a completely Black country, right? But you wouldn't have a Black liberation movement or a free Latin America if it wasn't because of Haiti. So you have to think about it like, oh, so our struggles have been here longer because 1492, Columbus came here, right? He came here, and that's when this whole thing happened or started. But they went a lot later to the United States. So even though they came together easier because it's only a land, it's easier for African American people to come together, right? If you talk about space, it's only one land. While it's harder for us, indigenous and Black people, and even the mestizo people. I don't like to use the tag because you're descendant of indigenous people anyways. You have these people that most of them are very poor, even poorer than most of people in the United States, right? That cannot travel because it's hard. So it's hard to come together. But and you that about Argentina, there's horrible things happening in Argentina to Black people. Like, even them, they're like in some other places. They are not able to consider themselves also we're Black, yes, but they don't think anything else. They don't come together. They have this wide thought process that also we fight about race, but we don't think about capitalism. So they're fighting against themselves in the end because you didn't have race if it wasn't because of capitalism and vice versa, right? So you have to think about that. But I think like after we, as you said, like after we solve these individual struggles, because most of them are just individuals, right? And come together, we find common ground. Like uh, I believe I found very good partners, like people who believe the same thing I do, or not the same thing I do, but like people who I fight with, like people who go with me to places. And even though we are apart, like we're in different countries, I have people from Peru, I have people from Colombia, people that are in Haiti, people that are in Puerto Rico, people in all parts of Latin America and all parts of the world. But when they come, like they gather their thoughts, we find a common ground, right? Even though we don't agree in certain things, like you might find people like, okay, I don't agree with Quijano, I agree with, let's say, Karina Ochoa, which is also a decolonial thinker. I don't agree with Curiel, I agree with Angela Davis, for example, but it's different names for the same thing, right? What Angela Davis said is what Ochi Curiel is saying right now, but she's saying it in Spanish from Colombia with a different name, right? But it's the same thing. So I think about it that way. I personally think about it that way. Of course, it's hard right now, but I think we are in a moment that we have to forget about ourselves, like ourselves as individuals, right? Like for a moment, and think, oh, so it's actually happening not only to me, but to all of us, all of us. So I think that the moment, it's happening right now to a lot of people, but the moment it happened to everyone is the moment that we will have like, okay, so we're fighting together.
Right.
I have a question.
Oh,
Hi,
sorry.
sorry. Go.
No, you go first.
No.
No. No. Okay,
Ah,
I guess
yeah.
it's me.
Okay.
What? Are you? Who's going? Okay, I'll just go. Sorry. Hi, I'm Isabella. I'm studying in Singapore. But I'm from the US and I'm Latina also. So my question, I think is kind of related to Max's, but I think like just we speak a lot of like movements as being like spaces for decolonizing or for being anti-racist or for being intersectional. But I was wondering if it's like even possible for institutions to be anti-racist, basically. And like, I mean, how, like, what does that look like? How do we imagine that to be, or like, can it exist with like, be it academic institutions or like state institutions or NGOs even, like, yeah.
That's
Do you think
actually
that
a
is?
very interesting question. Like that's like, wow, that's a very interesting question, I will say. So you have when you, in that case of state institutions specifically, first. So we think about state, we actually think about a colonial, thing. So it's actually this nation state that nación estado, estados nacionales, are actually a creation of whiteness. And so even though they might be Black people, like as the head of the country, we say Barack Obama, or now we have Kamala Harris running as vice president here. Even though they're Black, they are, I mean, and they might be anti-racist in their thought, like, oh, I'm working for people of color and I'm working for Black people, right? And for their rights. They also have displeased with the system. They benefit from it in a way. So when we think about these state institutions, it's problematic because, of course, we need to have rights. It's important because if not, we're gonna die. But also, we have to think about, in what context I am getting these rights. So if I'm getting rights, even though I have a law that says, you cannot be a racist, you cannot fire a person just for the color of their skin, you have a society that it's still racist, right? So it's not about only the institutions, it's also about the people that are in those institutions and the state, how the state was founded. You have, for example, I'm gonna put this example again, a state like America, a country like America, that was literally founded on slavery, right? So if you say, now that America is anti-racist, or you have institutions in America that are anti-racist. But how is that possible if you're benefiting from the money that was taken from slavery? For example, the foundation of your institution is slavery, literally. So in order for us to have institutions that are anti-racist, we have to get rid of state. I mean, it sounds very radical, of course, but in the concept of we have to create decolonization, we have to create a different structure. Might not be power, might be of rights. I don't know. We don't know yet, right? But we have to abolish state as we know it. We have to create something different, because all states, at least in America, right, and Europe as well, like we cannot deny it, Europe is the first benefactor, the primary benefactor of that it got the benefits from slavery and colonization. So if you, let's say you want to decolonize Europe, you have to get rid of what is Europe right now, right? You want to decolonize America and its institutions, and you want to have an anti-racist America, you have to get rid of the concept of America, right? And the same thing for Latin America, even though also we're all people of color, as I said, we are people of color, but the countries are white, the laws are white. You have in DR, for example, a law that was passed in 2013 that took away the nationality of thousands of people, right? Dominican people born from Haitian people that travel to DR. So you think about it, so, we're all black, right? How can we be racist because we're black, but we have racist laws? We have white people presiding at the top of the country, in the government. So you say, like, how is that even possible? Who are you representing? Well, that's a racist society. We have anti-racist institutions that are apart from this, a very important part of the state. You have the women ministry, the Ministry of Women, Ministerio de la Mujer, very funny when you have laws that are very sexist, very homophobic, right? So first you have to get rid of all of that. So for those institutions to be actually doing the work, you have to get rid of all those laws of other institutions that are contradicting this institution. So if you want to have, let's say, an anti-racist institution in the United States, you have to get rid of prisons, for example. You have to abolish prisons. You have to abolish the penal system. You have to abolish the police, right? How are you gonna say, I'm pro-Black people, but I also support police and I support jails and the prison system, which are actually founded on slavery? I mean, we all know the 13th Amendment, right? That basically allows slavery as long as you are in prison. So how are you gonna be anti-racist? Or you're gonna say, I'm an anti-racist institution, but I don't question the prison system, or I allow it to be. I mean, we can have collectives, but I'm getting funding from that state who has also the prison system. So I'm getting the money from I'm getting money from slavery in the end. So that's a good, like, a very interesting question. The same thing happens with NGOs, like we have thousands of them, right? Very interesting, very good. They're doing a good job, but like, what else, right? Like, and that's we have here in the art, say here in the art, in the art we have this comes to like the NGO feminism. Also, we work for women. We call them the tokens. You know, we have the studies and we save these poor Black women. Also provide. What about the systemic issues? What are you doing to get rid of them? Do you question them? You're only doing that you not give us pennies, like, oh, so go get a lunch. Is that like what? It's like when you give money to a beggar, right? It's very nice. It's a very touching thing. You're doing that good thing. But what happens when you're not there to give money to that beggar, for example, that person that is homeless, probably, that has a lot of issues that are the basis, the structure. So we didn't have homeless people. You didn't have a class system that only benefits rich people, for example, right? And if houses were free, right? So that's very, so you might be even, you're doing the good thing, obviously. You're working, you're helping that person at the moment. The moment you're not there, that person is gonna be still the same because there's a system that is affecting and it is causing that. So we have to question and work against the system first. That's what I think.
I think Luis had a question, and then maybe Nico also had one, so we can ask him afterwards.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, this is a question for all, I think. I want to know what is it that but I mean, I guess please Ciguapa answer first. Like, what is it that has maintained your desire to keep learning and keep fighting and keep like, what is it that has allowed you to organize with other people to make this decolonial not only thought but also a fight and a practice in your life? How is it that or what is it that has made you keep doing it? What emotions do you think we should be cultivating, and how do you think we can make that better and stronger everywhere we are?
Thank you for the question. I think you said something very important. It's what emotions like make you want to fight, right? So, and so first, I was not born like into this decolonial thing. Of course, it came one day slowly. I first was part of white feminism. Even though I'm Black, I was a white feminist. Like, you know, whiteness is not only a thing of color, but I found, for example, one day I was looking for Black feminists in Latin America. And I found Ochi Curiel. She's from my country. And I was like, oh my God, I found someone. That's so great. And I became a fan. I was so obsessed with her. Like, I couldn't believe I had found a Black woman which was also a feminist and was also anti-racist and was also deco. I was like, oh my God, this is real. And I kept looking into that. I was very interested because I found someone that looked like me, that faced the same struggles as I did, or similar struggles, right? And I became I was obsessed, like a girl finding it like the most amazing cartoon ever. Like, wow. Like me at 5 years old watching Sailor Moon. That was me reading Ochiguri, literally. And then a few months after, that thing happened that I met her in person. And that was okay. So I was reading her. I didn't think myself, oh, I'm a decolonial feminist. That didn't happen at the time. It happened later, even though I had like the thoughts. And I listened to them, and Yuderkis as well, Yuderkis Espinosa. And I felt a lot that day. I felt a lot of things. first of all, there was a white woman, Dominican woman, but white, which is a very important feminist in Dominican Republic. She said that, oh, so modernity actually helped women. So, well, it brought us feminist thought, illustration, functionality, and she was like, so what women did it help? And I was so upset. Like, Judarkis became so upset, but I was more upset even. And I raised my hand. It was like, so I'm a Black woman. I actually do not feel you're talking about me when you say that modernity helped people, because what about my grandmother, my great great grandmother, which was probably even Blacker than I am, right? That was probably a slave. Did that help that woman? And I was thinking about that, and that thought that I shared with a lot of people that day. I I I I felt that thought, and that thought followed me, and it's still with me, right? That I don't know how to call it, but it was like it's not only a struggle, but it's like I'm resentment, I think, with that thing that also white women are actually benefiting from this, while my people are dying. So that's one thing that still keeps me like working on this and wanting to find people that want to work in this. And when I like teaching about this, like it's one of my passions. Like I go, Max probably knows that I go on social media and also other live streamings talking about this, and people come to me and tell me, oh, thank you, I actually didn't think about it before. So that also that thing that thought that I'm actually spreading this and helping other people find themselves, it's something that keeps me going. So I think that, okay, so that thing that I hate this system, like there was this time in my life that I cried every night thinking about the injustice of this Philippine system. Like it was horrible. It gave me so much anxiety. Like also I have to go work tomorrow and I don't know what's gonna happen. Maybe I'm gonna die and I don't know, because I don't know what's gonna happen in this system. So that thought is still with me today. It's not that bad, like, oh, I'm gonna die tomorrow. But I still think, oh, but there are people who are dying, and I feel it very unfair. No one deserves that. And that's and also the fact that, oh, so what do these people deserve? They deserve to be in peace. They deserve to be happy. The hope of a better world, it's what keeps me going. Sometimes might not be that, maybe I'm not in the right path, but I think I have the right thoughts or the right motives. Like, oh, so maybe I'm gonna change my opinion later. Maybe I'm gonna expand it, maybe integrate a lot of things later. But I started on feminism because of the same reasons. And those reasons led me to anti-racist, to decolonial thoughts, right? And brought me to Ochikuriel, to Yuderkis, to Quijano, to Fanon. And I don't know about you, but sometimes when I read some of these scholars the first time, I cried because they're very simple. For example, you have Judith is very emotional in her writing, very emotional. So it was very easy for me to cry because, oh, so she's actually speaking about this. I can understand her. She's speaking about something that I feel, right? Something I went through. So that notion that I will find more people that go through that gives me strength. I don't know if that's something anybody here shares.
Nico, you wanna go?
Inside, like what you said about Black men being under white women in some aspects, like of privilege, Like I think that's very, very important, especially because in Mexico, where I live, is the white feminist like movement is very strong, like especially turfism. It's
I know.
it's very intense, especially because I follow you on social media and I've seen like the debates you go through every day on Twitter, and it's it's very, very like upsetting, especially like as a trans masculine person that I am. It's like, where is my place now in feminism, right? Because for these white feminists, and especially like white almost supremacist feminists, it's like you were raised as a woman, so you belong in feminism, and trans women don't belong because they are men, right? And so trans activism had to come to say like, no, they are also part of feminism, right? And these questions about like, then what's the role of like non-binary people in feminism? Like, you cannot say that because they look like something they have privilege, because
Of
no,
course.
that's not true. And especially like also the criminalization of sex work, for example, all these things that have like come out of this radical in like
Radical, right?
radical ideas, is like because something that you have said, I think in your social media is like, white feminism has taught me to forget about my Black brothers, and that's something like my question is like, if inside the colonial feminism and inside intersectional feminism, we can add like Black men and indigenous men and non-binary people, like if that would be like the next step in like the feminist movement, for example.
Right, yeah, that's a very good question. So, yeah, so there's something Ochikurio said once, and she said that everybody belongs to feminism. You said, wow, that's like a very broad statement. I actually got a lot of hate from Mexican feminists for sharing that, right? And they were like, oh, but it's about the struggles of women, but like, what women? So actually, if you wanna, as I said before, it's for me, it's very logical. And that's when I was part of that feminism, that's the thing that took me out of it. Like, I was like, oh no, it's not actually working. Because I said once, like, if you actually wanna liberate, let's say, but if you wanna work for all women, you wanna liberate all women, like you said, you have to liberate, let's say, Black women, no? Right? But how are you gonna liberate Black women if you don't work against racism? So in order for you to work against racism, you have to also work for Black men. That's a very logical process, right? Like, hello. But they don't agree with that because they're racist. So they don't understand that's a very racist thought. Like, oh, so I don't want to work for Black men because they have their own issues, whatever. That's very racist thought. So that's something I was talking to a trans woman friend. Because she's a trans woman, because there's this very interesting thing about trans feminism. Like they have their own theories and stuff, and that's something we share with Black feminism shares. I think that we have a lot in common, right? There's especially the experiences of being denied womanhood or our gender, right? We are not seen as that's why we think that gender is something very colonialistic, because the fact that used in radical feminism as well, it's very wide. Because how are you gonna tell me that you're not racist, but you're transphobic? Because actually, both of them share the same basis. Like, they're very essentialistic, very biologicist. I don't know how to say the word, but they share the same base, right? Like, if Black women and Black men were denied the fact they were Black women and men, you're doing the same thing to trans women and trans men, then you're being racist. So you cannot tell me that you are anti-racist and you want to liberate Black women if you don't work with trans women as well, and if you don't work with trans men as well. And feminism is not about the subject. This is how they call it, that the subject of feminism, the political subject, which is women. Parenthesis, white, right? It's not about that. I think it doesn't matter who you are, but what you do. We're into this identity politics. That's something that that Combahee River Collective once said in their manifesto. So when we talk about identity politics, we're not talking about also in a right-wing way, or the the way that we're talking about. So my identity is a political statement. That's what we mean. But it doesn't mean that because I am Black, I have a free pass to be misogynistic or to be transphobic. It doesn't really, in that moment of fight, it doesn't matter who I am or what I look like, but in what place I am, in what spot, what is my role, what I do for the liberation of people, right? So the fact that they decide to not include trans people in feminism, it's very, I mean, it doesn't work for women if they want to work for women, because in the end we're all in this system, right? You want to get rid of the system, you have to work with everybody and for everybody, and that's a fact. You think about it, it's for me it's very logical. The moment I thought about it, that actually doesn't make sense. Things make sense. So how am I going to liberate these people if I don't work for these people who are also affected by the same system? And they say they want to abolish gender, but the moment you act against the mandates of gender, they say, oh, so you're not, they are very against that. Like, so they're against men who are feminine, they're against women who are masculine, and they have very racialist thoughts, like also women, Black women, they say also you are actually a trans man. When actually this is a cisgendered Black woman, right? So you think, oh, so actually they're all not only being racist, but they're being transphobic there. So it's actually the same root. So if you want to fight against, the same thing I tell to Black people, so you want to fight against racism, you have to fight for trans people, right? Not only because there are trans people who are Black, but because transphobia and racism share the same origins, exactly the same thing.
I think we have time for one, maybe two questions. Just to like end 10:15 because of the 15 minutes we started late. Okay, I have one. So earlier during your presentation, you said that decolonization is something that we can do. We should decolonize both our mind and our body. And I wonder if you can speak more about what decolonizing the body means to you.
Sure, it's well, decolonizing the body in that sense, it means that you don't feel attached to whiteness, like your body doesn't feel attached to whiteness. So your perception of your body is not something that comes from whiteness or Eurocentristic standards. So we perceive, let's say, people with indigenous traits that actually doesn't exist, but that's something that was implied by racialists, that there's people with certain phenotypical traits that are inferior and they're ugly, for example. And so you have people that think of themselves are as inferior and as ugly. I was one of those people. I always knew I was Black. I know that looked a little lighter on the screen. But let's say in my family, I'm the darkest one. And they always call me Prieta. And not in a bad sense. It was a cute nickname my dad had for me. And I love you, my Prieta. I love you, my Black girl. My dad is also Black, but he's a little lighter than me. And I felt very bad because everything I had in front of me, even though my friends were all Black, but they all had strengthened chemically strengthen the hair. And I was, let's say, a fan of Hilary Duff, which is a blonde white girl from the United States, right? I'm not in any way similar to her. My body doesn't look in any way, it doesn't look like her, but I wanted to be her or wanted to look like her. So I strengthened my hair and I even had bangs like her. It was very funny. I have bangs now, but they're curly. So I wanted to be like that. So when I talk about the colonization of the bodies, how we treat our bodies, right? Not only in the aesthetical way, like the beauty standards, but also the what we eat, what we do, what we dance, what we consume. It's very important. I mean, doesn't mean that what we consume today is bad, but of course, it's not the same thing. Like, it's not the same, right? We can still consume what makes us consume, and so okay, so I'm decolonizing, but you also have to appreciate that there are different type of thing that you can have for yourself, right? That's the difference. We don't think that one thing is superior to the other. We don't think that, oh, so actually indigenous things are better than white things. We actually think that they are the same. They have the same value. But the same system believes that, okay, so one thing is superior to the other, and the thing is white thing. So what we actually mean is that you have to be able you have to give yourself space and time to get rid of those, let's say, models of consumerism, you know, that way you dress up, the way you treat your hair, it's not the same like a white person who treated their hair, because we have different type of hair usually, you know, most of the time. Like black people usually, I mean, there are people with different types of hair, but usually they're black people have curly or coarse hair. So if you treat it like a white person with like a person with very wavy hair or very straight hair, you're mistreating your hair. If you, for example, it's been proven that most of 90% of indigenous people and are lactose intolerant, but you see us drinking milk every day. We're mistreating our bodies, right? So milk is something that actually was brought by people from Europe, like that drinking milk. And the way we also consume stuff and consumes other bodies, we consume the earth, because also the land is part of our social relationships. That way we consume it is not something that's something that comes from us. It's something that was implanted. So I think that we have to question everything. So the way I treat my plants, the way I
Let me see. Uh-huh. Um, yeah, we're contacting her on a different channel to see what's going on. I'm assuming she'll just join again.
Hi, sorry. Well, yeah. Ciguapa is having technical difficulties. I know that the event has like run like a bit long. So if she's not able to join in, like the following minutes, the fo- the couple, los siguientes minutos, yeah, in a couple of minutes. Um, um, well, feel free to like leave the chat if you want, the Zoom link. But thank you all for joining us. Thanks also for the new faces. It's so nice to like see you. If you have any like comments or feedback, please feel free to send them to us. If you also have questions still, also feel free to send them to us. Um, yeah, we'll give her another 5 minutes. If not, we'll just assume that the discussion is over. Yeah, but thanks for your question, Nico. She was answered to your question, right? Yeah, yeah. Oh no, she was answering yours.
Yeah,
But yeah, anyway, thanks for your questions, everyone.
One new message from home. Oh, you cannot accept her.
Oh, she's back.
Hey, Luis. Okay. Hello, welcome back.
Hi.
I'm sorry, my computer like got frozen and stopped working. It's still stuck on the same place. Well, I was saying that that so basically just to wrap up that thought I had is that how we consume and how we treat our body, not only the beauty, the aesthetical way, but how what we eat, how we treat our you know our environment as well, because that's something is different how the western sees, oh, the western world sees, oh, land as an item to consume. So we don't consume land, we actually have a connection with it, like it's also a body. So when we talk about decolonizing the body, we also mean um, how we treat the world that surrounds us. So that
Okay, I think it's just at this point. Um, we'll probably have to end. I got. Anyways, thank you all for coming and for staying like over time. Yeah, she disappeared. Oh, is she there? Tuk, tuk.
I'm here. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm saying that we can just like finish. So perhaps if you just like have a way of concluding the idea, and you can say goodbye to each other, or not. It's also fine.
Okay, can you see me? Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. So I was saying that, yeah, that way we treat our land, our bodies, and the environment. That's what I mean when we say decolonizing the body. Basically. I'm sorry about everything.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. You
Yes,
guys were so nice.
Anyways,
Yeah.
thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Jennifer, Ciguapa. I think this is a dialogue we all enjoyed. Yeah, thanks. Bye. And yeah, you're welcome to Singapore anytime.
Oh, thank you. I'm gonna stay for that then.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming. Hope yeah, you learned and enjoyed and unlearned as well.
Irony. Okay, let me stop recording.